Author and analyst Ebrahim Harvey says that the capitalism should be dismantled in the country. In his new book, The Great Pretenders and Class Under ANC Rule, Harvey argues that the system has wrought havoc in South Africa. He says the ANC has completely failed to roll back race and class divisions. He joins us now. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Harvey. Thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon, Dr. Harvey. Can you hear me?
Yes, but I don't know how to enlarge this screen.
Dr. Harvey, it's not a problem. We can see you clearly. Our viewers can see you very clearly. Now, if we can continue with the conversation, you are a veteran political analyst and an author. As you reflect on your life and times, what are your thoughts on the current state of South Africa?
Okay, I thought this was starting at 1:30. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a huge question, you know, especially because of this crisis-ridden juncture that we're in at the moment. Especially the huge crisis in the ruling party, you know, and more broadly in the country. I'm, you know, as my book indicates, you know, deeply worried and concerned about both the current situation and because of its magnitude, you know, against the historical background I sketched in the book and this huge factionalist crisis that has got the ruling party. Extremely concerned, you know, with the future of both the ANC and this country. I think what would be very important is to see how the ANC finally resolves this debacle, factionalist debacle around the General Secretary, Ace Magashule. That might set a tone, you know, for what is likely to come in the coming period within the ANC.
Now, Dr. Harvey, you mentioned Ace Magashule, and you also write in your book that the step-aside tussle within the ANC is not in itself the main factional division. You say that it's merely a symptom of underlying problems in the party. Comment also about the cloud that's currently surrounding, or rather hovering over the head of the Health Minister, Zweli Mkhize, in relation to that rule. Some are calling for him to resign. Some are calling for Ramaphosa, the president, to actually fire him. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, obviously the step-aside rule, the step-aside rule is a kind of administrative, bureaucratic procedure, you know, to deal with cases of discipline within the party. What I meant when I said that there are deeper forces at work and deeper problems and crises that underlies the crisis within the ANC and even the suspension of ACE. The ANC is in a serious quagmire, really. And I think the book, that's precisely why I dug into the background. I think it's really, in the fine analysis, got a lot to do with the neoliberal policy regime, the ANC, you know, and that trajectory is very clear from June 1996 when GAIR was adopted. And all the other subsequent neoliberal macroeconomic, whether you call it askhisa or whatever it is, it retained intact. And that's why you see, as I indicated, the unstoppable township protests from June 2004. No, very few people really interrogate these protests and ask why they've not been able to, why has the ANC not been able to stop these protests, because the underlying grievances of these protesters have never been addressed, which is precisely why. I mean, you can see what a mess, an unmitigated mess, basic services are in townships. It wasn't even so bad during the apartheid period, really. And those who study this area will know it. It's just gone so much worse during this very post-apartheid period when people legitimately expected that at least their basic needs would be adequately attended to. So I really think, and I want to repeat it, this factionalist divide as acrimonious as it is in the ruling party, is symptomatic of a deeper malaise within the ruling party. And you can see it in the 2016 local government elections. As I indicated, even ordinary people are waking up to what is going on in the ANC. I mean, it's just an abysmal situation. You go to most townships, and not just so-called African townships. Go to Chatsworth, go to the colored townships. It's a mess, but particularly in the so-called African townships, where one would have thought that would have been the priority of the ANC in terms of its own Africans in particular and blacks in general. What has happened to that? I mean, Africans are the worst off today. They are worse off, arguably, than they were under apartheid. So even the ANC's maxim of Africans in particular and blacks in general, it's turned out to be a cruel joke in post-apartheid South Africa. And you only need to walk through the streets of the townships to see what I'm talking about. I mean, sewage running down the streets, children dying in pit latrine schools without toilets, water. It's an unmitigated mess, and I don't think there's anyone in the ANC leadership who would deny the magnitude of this crisis. And they can't, they can't evade responsibility. They're the ruling party for what we're sitting with in this country at this moment.
And I mean, Dr. Harvey, it's not even just in the townships. We've got rolling blackouts that have been plaguing the country in the past few weeks. We've had water shortages that are crippling hospitals unable to function.
Yes.
Some surgeries have been cancelled as a result of not having sufficient water. And patients' lives are even put at risk. You mentioned that there is this malaise in the ANC. Is there a cure for it?
No, really, it's again a huge question because, we're tied down with electoral parliamentary politics. We have a constitutional democracy, which measures voter sentiment through elections, etc. We are tied up. Even the socialist left, you end up seeing EFF ended up in parliament. That is what it's going to be for the foreseeable future. So when you talk about a future and what alternatives there are, we're compelled to face the reality that, it's a question of voter, choice and elections and so on. But, I had honestly wished, and you see how poorly they did in the 2016 local government elections. I'm talking about the alternative, NUMSA-based Socialist Workers' Revolutionary Party. I had wished really that we were able to have an alternative to the left of the ANC, who would really have a program, a vision and policies that will capture the interests and needs of this majority black working class that's been so sorely neglected with interests and needs. And you can see in the townships what is going on. I'm happy you raised the question of Eskom, and the blackouts, I mean, you can see even the attempts to say that the new CEO of Eskom is guilty of racism has proven, to be just a facade. The race is used, as I indicate in the book, why so often race is used. It's an easy thing to do. But in the final analysis, and I've did many pieces on the Eskom crisis, in the final analysis, it is not even now about what the current leadership is able to do and all the blackouts. There's a deeper history.
Well, Dr. Ebrahim, I just want to ask you to stay with me as we continue this conversation. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. If you're just tuning in, you're watching Newsfeed, the PM edition, and I'm Kiora Petse Hlope. We're in conversation with Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, who is a veteran political analyst and author of The Great Pretenders. Dr. Harvey, thank you very much for staying with us. Now, one of the issues that I want you to also touch on page 135 of your book, you talk about gender inequality being the elephant in the room in the country. How differently are women being treated now than how they were treated during apartheid days?
No, the answer to that question, important as it is startlingly evident, in this country. And you don't need to go any further than the depressing, sad lot of African women, in particular in the townships. Who do you think this deep and growing social crisis, typified by service delivery protests, which are unstoppable for so many years, mainly affects? it mainly affects women, black women in the townships. So there are various levels at which you can respond to this question of gender, But the ANC has certainly also not covered itself in glory in terms of its own past regarding, the treatment of women within the ANC and the period in exile and so on. But one had really thought that the needs, because that is how you got to measure the question of how gender is being treated, or women are being treated in post-apartheid South Africa. You'll come down to the most important things around health, basic services, water, sanitation, those kind of basic needs in the townships, And whenever the townships suffer, and people, the working class, if it is mainly women, they're in the forefront of, basic services and carrying out a whole range of domestic tasks and so on, with water, sanitation, electricity is so vitally important. So, I've penned many pieces on this thing, and really it's a very sad, deplorable situation that black women find themselves in. I mean, many writers have exposed this, look at the ANC Women's League. You must start there. The ANC Women's League is supposed to primarily deal with the problems facing working class women in townships. I could not even get the ANC Women's League to get themselves involved and give me an interview when I did my PhD on prepaid water meters and how it affected people in the townships. I thought speaking to them, I got no response in my request for an interview precisely because they're so far removed from these daily struggles of black women in the townships, It's just, there's probably no organization, probably even more than the ANC itself. The ANC Women's League has been a disaster, unmitigated disaster insofar as dealing with and responding to a whole range of issues and problems that black working class women are faced with in the townships. It's really a deplorable situation,
And what about the issue of youth, the high unemployment statistics in the country nationally, also affecting the youth population specifically? We are in Youth Month. What do you think we might see the government doing in this coming month to create jobs, not only for the month of June, but also like on an annual basis, actually, consciously opening up the industry or various industries for young people to get employment?
Hey, this is a very tough question. And indeed it is extremely difficult to deal with unemployment. I'll tell you just very quickly on a structural level why. And it's the case around the world, especially now in the wake of the devastating consequences of this COVID-19 epidemic, When jobs, instead of being created, are being lost, 3-point-something million over the past 12, 14 months in South Africa gives you an indication of the magnitude of the negative impact which COVID has had. But, that's why I said, unless the ANC, it's in the book, unless the ANC not only gets to grip with its own factionalist crisis and divisions, but with economic policy. And, the economy is still overwhelmingly dominated by white elite, what I call white monopoly capital. They shape jobs during a crisis. They don't create jobs. It's the system we are dealing with. That's why I said so much in the book. It's not just apartheid, And the ANC made some big changes, new constitution, the right to vote, a whole lot of important democratic freedoms, after 1994. But it left intact the economy in the hands of the white elite, And if you look at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, it is completely white-dominated management structures. It is virtually the same. And unless you get hold of the economy and deal with the economic policies of the ANC, whose interests and needs are prioritized by its economic policies, that's the bottom line. And it has not been the black working class, certainly. And that is why you've got this huge unemployment problem. It's never been so bad. And I'm afraid to say, that as long as this COVID crisis exists, and it seems it's going to be with us for quite a long while still, The likelihood, is that unemployment may even get worse. But you cannot, it's a myth. You cannot talk about getting to grips with unemployment without dealing with the capitalist economic framework within which unemployment is so rampant today. It's an illusion you're peddling, whoever you are. It doesn't matter who. If you think you're going to get to grips with unemployment, with dealing with this capitalist economic structure that sheds jobs at the slightest manifestation of a crisis or when profits decline, the first thing they do is to shed jobs. So how can you create employment when you have employers who, once their bottom line is threatened and they don't receive the profits they desire, they start shedding labor? Private enterprise and private property is enshrined in our constitution. The basis of capitalism is the recognition of private property and the rights. That is it. You think the ANC can tell whichever company it is wants to shed labor because, no, you can't do that. No. You see, so unless you deal with capitalism and these huge powers employers have to shed labor left, right, as they choose, I mean, what are you talking about? That's why this whole debate of unemployment in this country is seriously limited. Unless you deal with the structural features of unemployment, at the heart and center of which is this capitalist economy, you're not going to make big strides at all.
Well, Dr. Harvey, do you have any confidence that perhaps the ruling party or maybe one of the opposition parties could spark that debate and force a change in those economic policies to favor South Africans who are underprivileged currently?
No, you'll never get that from the DA is a capitalist party, even more than the ANC is. No, you know what? Let me tell you where the answer lies. And they have not flexed their muscle. To the contrary, they've been tamed and domesticated by the ANC. I'm talking about COSATU, who's in the ruling alliance with the ANC, the South African Communist Party, and the SACP. I mean, COSATU. That is where you're supposed to get the pressure for a shift in economic policy that will prioritize the needs and interests of the black, its own members and the wider working class. You don't get it. Why do you think the ANC is not shifted? Because there hasn't been enough strength and cohesion and commitment from the alliance partners to put the ANC under pressure, and yet they vote every time there's elections. They have a few warnings about this and that, and continue to vote for the ANC. That's where unless COSATU and the SACP really puts its foot down and deals with the ANC in terms of these issues, you're not going to make much headway.
Well, Dr. Harvey, let's leave it there for this afternoon. Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, who's a political analyst and author of The Great Pretenders.